and Freddie Mac, and I quote here The Economist, the state complicity in the case of these two giant companies, and this is the quote, allowed Fannie and Freddie to operate with tiny amounts of capital. The two groups had core capital as defined by the regulator of 83.2 billion at the end of 2007. This supported 5.2 trillion of debt and guarantees, a gearing ratio of 65 to 1. So 65 times more credit and adventurous speculation than what they had capital for. According to Credit Sites, a research group, Fannie and Freddie were counterparties to 2.3 trillion worth of derivative transactions related to their hedging activities. There is no way a private bank would be allowed to have such a highly geared balance sheet, nor would it qualify for the highest AAA credit rating. They use their cheap financing to buy higher yielding assets. Moreover, with so much at stake, no wonder the companies built a formidable lobbying machine. Ex-politicians were given jobs. Critics could expect a rough ride. The companies were not afraid to bite the hands that fed them. The reference is, of course, to the American state. But why should they be afraid to bite the hands that fed them? There is a totally symbiotic relationship between giant corporations and the capitalist state. So therefore they can do what they like, and as The Economist is willing even to admit, they can also buy politicians who provide for them the legal jungle in which they could operate the way they did. Even today, we don't know the magnitude of the sums involved. The money, the United States, that alone is $10 trillion. More, in fact, is in excess of $10 trillion. How is it going to be paid? Because now states go bankrupt because they are incapable of paying for the interest charges incurred on the basis of the kind of borrowing and capital expenditure involved in their economies. And by far the guiltiest in this respect is, of course, the United States of America, borrowing astronomical sums of money from everywhere, sucking in these funds into the American economy. And one of the ironies of recent history, of late 20th, early 21st century history, is that China, of all countries, is the principal savior of the American debt. If the Chinese credit were to hold in, the American economy would collapse tomorrow. Now, these are extremely serious problems because obviously even China sooner or later will feel the consequences. I quoted in one of the essays you'll find in the book on the challenge and burden of historical time on the question of economy. Towards the end of one of the chapters I quoted Deng Xiaoping, who was saying, famous Chinese proverb, the color of the cat doesn't matter so long as it catches the mouse. He meant, it doesn't matter whether it's capitalist or socialist or whatever else, what is important is to catch the mouse, great development. Well, I added to this quotation at the point, well, good, so long as the cat catches the mouse. But what if instead of happy mouse catching, you end up with rat infestation? And that is on the horizon also of the Chinese economy today, because this kind of problem, the problems we are discussing today, is so profound, so far-reaching. We are talking about a completely unimaginable kind of crisis in comparison to the crisis of 1929-33. That crisis was relatively small in comparison to what we have today. It was confined to basically the financial sector originating a stock exchange collapse in the United States, and the greater part of the world was not affected by it. And of course, the consequence of that, getting out of that crisis even, was very difficult for the United States. Depression went on throughout the 30s, and it was getting deeper again into depression, the American economy, towards the end of the 30s, and only the outbreak of the Second World War saved the country from this new and even more profound depression. Now, we also have the problem of sooner or later these credits must be called in. And a few weeks ago, the Economist was referring to what you can find now on the stock exchanges and in some financial firms, that traders in the credit default swaps market have recently made bets on the unthinkable, according to the Economist, that America may default on its debt. Now, I don't think that it is unthinkable at all. In fact, it is, and it has been for a long time, as an absolute certainty. It's only a question of time when it will happen. And that's why I wrote, you find it in my book on page 963, what I am going to quote now about this problem. In a world of financial insecurity, nothing suits better the practice of gambling with astronomical and criminally unsecured sums on the world's stock exchanges, foreshadowing an earthquake of magnitude 9 or 10 on the financial Richter scale, than to call the enterprises which engage in such gambling securities management. When exactly, and in what form, of which there can be several more or less brutal varieties, the United States will default on its astronomical debt cannot be seen at this point in time. There can be only two certainties in this regard. The first is that the inevitability of the American default will deeply affect everyone on this planet. And the second, that the preponderant hegemonic power position of the United States will continue to be asserted in every way so as to make the rest of the world pay for the American debt for as long as it is capable of doing. But that's where the